Well, Sarah, I think that at first instance, generally by the time a franchisor would come to us, they would have a concept in mind, and they would have done a fair bit of work on their model, perhaps in conjunction with their accountant. And so from a legal perspective, once they've been given the green light to proceed, perhaps from a financial perspective, from a legal perspective, I think the branding is probably the most critical issue. And so the trademarks should be considered in terms of registration, what registration options there are available, and what classes the mark should be registered in as broadly as possible. In conjunction with that, they should be working with their accountant on the structure, so to determine where that intellectual property in the trademarks may be held. We are seeing these days that intellectual property is held in a holdings trust, but each case depends on its individual circumstances. In addition to the trademarks, I think the other critical factor is domain names. They should be registered at an early stage, but they need to understand that or need to be certain that they're going to get the trademark registered, I suppose, before they then go down that process and register a large range of domain names. We often see a structure, as I said previously, based on a holding trust holding the intellectual property and the franchising being operated through a separate operating entity. That may be a trust, it may be a company, it really depends upon the accountant, the accounting advice. From a legal perspective, we look at asset protection related issues, and on that basis we try and keep the assets of the business in the separate holding trust and license those assets across to the operating entity. From the accounting perspective and tax perspective, there may well be other considerations depending upon the individual franchisor's personal circumstances. Yes, I think it's wise to work in conjunction with the accountant so that we can come up with a compromised structure. There is always pluses and minuses in asset protection versus taxation advantage, but it's a matter of working together and looking at the compromises and looking at what the end game is. And if the franchisor is looking to exit at 10 years, well then he needs to have a strategy in place to allow a tax-effective exit, as well as providing certain asset protection strategies in the meantime. We speak to franchisors in terms of ensuring that in a personal perspective they don't hold all of the family's personal assets in their personal name, for example. There are quite a few factors that need to be taken into account, and it's just a matter of working with the accountant and determining the financial situation of the franchisor, and as I said, looking at the positives and negatives associated with the various options.